Jonathan, welcome to Startup Health Now.
Well, Steve, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's exciting for you to be here on your 1-year anniversary since joining Ping An.
It is indeed.
And for those who aren't familiar with Ping An, I'd love you to kind of describe not just what Ping An does, but where Ping An is going, and especially why we became partners last year.
Yeah, indeed. Well, firstly, let me say that we are delighted to be investors in Startup Health, and we're seeing fruit from the cooperation that we have already, and looking forward to much more, but we'll get onto that in the conversation.
Excellent.
I guess to start with, what is Ping An? Ping An is a very large China-based financial institution, started in the insurance business, P&C, life, health, annuity. By market cap, it's now by a pretty significant margin the largest insurance company in the world. I think our market cap is about 180 billion, fluctuates between 180, 200 billion, something like that. The next largest is about 120, something like that. And then it drops off pretty quickly from there. So it's a really big insurance company. But it's not just an insurance company. We have a broad range of financial services businesses, ranging from a sizable bank to a securities company. We're one of the leading retail brokers in China, to trust, to venture capital, to leasing, and basically the full spectrum of financial services. We have the widest number of financial services licenses in China. What's very interesting and perhaps relevant to our conversation today is in the last 5 years or so, we've built out a pretty interesting and very innovative health ecosystem. And that includes what is the largest telemedicine platform in the world today, with, as of the end of last year, 192 million registered users. The brand name is Ping An Good Doctor. We just took that platform public.
I know.
Actually.
Congratulations! Another
Thank
thing
you.
we celebrated today.
We did indeed, and that platform, we raised new capital of about $1.1 billion to further the growth of that platform and its international expansion agenda. And the IPO itself was, I believe, 600 times oversubscribed, which is
600 times.
Which is simply extraordinary. But the platform itself is really very interesting indeed. We have about 5 million visitors engaging on health topics every day, and about 500,000 users actually seeking medical consultations on a daily basis, with the panel of about 9,000 doctors that we have, just under 1,000 on our payroll, and the balance are part-time participants in our program. So that's a really interesting platform. But we have a range of other businesses, including a platform that supports the state health insurance program in China, which is about 50% of all, covers about 50% of all medical expenditure in China. And we work with about 250 municipalities, which represents in aggregate about 600 million people. And we're helping the administrators of the state health program to figure out how to control overprescription, overbilling, outright fraud. We're also working with them to help co-underwrite the risk, using data analytics, using actuarial science to basically turn these public liabilities into commercially underwritable exposures, and giving these municipalities caps and collars and things like that without going into too much detail.
So you're describing an extraordinary platform with extraordinary reach, but this company began actually not in the big scheme of things, given its size and scope, by one man 30 years ago.
Yeah, it was started by Peter Ma, in Chinese, Ma Mingzi is his name. He's one of the iconic entrepreneurs in China. There are two other people with the surname Ma, which happens to be the Chinese word for horse. So Jack Ma at Alibaba, yep, and Pony Ma at Tencent. And together they're referred to as the three Ma's, or the three horses, sort of powering the economy ahead. So he's a remarkable individual. He started the company with 3 people, including himself, 30 years ago. And the company has grown in earnings over the last 30 years at about 29% compound, which means that it basically triples every 5 years. So it's an extraordinary growth story, and it's partly the growth of China, but much more than that, it's the constant renewal of the existing businesses and the willingness to envisage and create entirely new businesses repeatedly. So we have today 33 businesses at the first level. Only 2 of them derived from acquisitions. Everything else has been organically grown, literally from scratch.
And Peter's still running the company.
And Peter is the CEO and chairman of the company.
Right. So when you talked to him, because I know he was, he was responsible for recruiting you to come on a year ago, but
and is the reason why I joined. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's extraordinary. So he started this organization 30 years ago. What was the original vision, to the best of your knowledge?
They started out in marine hull insurance. And their dream was to at least build a business, and then eventually, could we do life insurance? And could we get a license to do life insurance? And turned out they could, and they did. And today, life insurance is probably the financial core of the company, and in terms of cash flow generation, in terms of earnings generation.
So started with a single seed of an idea, 30 years later, $200 billion business. What made it so compelling for you to join Ping An a year ago?
I knew about Ping An, and I'd had friends that worked at Ping An over the years, because I've been in Asia for about 25 years. I grew up in Australia, but spent most of my career in Asia. And I worked for Citibank for 18 of those years. And so I knew about them. I knew they were a very large company. I knew that they were very well regarded. I knew that they were that experienced extremely consistent but rapid growth over a very long time. What I didn't know was that on top of the spectrum of businesses and the massive scale of their traditional businesses, so we have about 160 million financial services clients, about 70 million insurance clients, about 160 million financial services clients. On top of that, the company started investing heavily in technology about 12 years ago. Today has its own cloud. We do our own AI R&D. So we've built our own facial recognition, our own voice print recognition. We've been working on a lot of areas of image diagnostics in medical applications, and for retinal, for X-ray, for other image modalities. For medical applications, we have a lot of applications using advanced AI for our insurance business. So, for example, we have a platform for claims management for auto, where if you have a ding in your car, you take your cell phone, you scan the damage. We have every model of every car built into our sort of decision engine. We can tell whether the damage is structural or superficial. In auto, 70% of our claims are superficial. Then we have a pricing engine that can price the damage instantly. And then we can give you an offer that says, this is how much it's going to cost. We can allow you to basically take the cash immediately or go through our claims process. It's your choice. Right. So we've got many, many applications like that. So I was astounded to find just the breadth of what they had, that the company really doesn't have any technology debt. There are no mainframe computers, there are no legacy COBOL platforms or anything like that you see in most financial institutions. And then I think the third layer for me was the creation of new businesses. So the health ecosystem is part of that, but I think it's the only big financial institution I know of in the world that is capable of at all creating next generation businesses at scale. Good Doctor is a good example. Lufax is our personal wealth management platform. It's now the largest personal wealth management platform online in the world. $80 billion of client assets under management. Compare that to something like Betterment here in the States. I think they hit $10 billion after 7 or 8 years, maybe longer, in August last year when I met John Stein, who runs that company. And they're a very good company, by the way. We were a shareholder when I was at Citi. But it just tells you the scale at which these things can happen. And Ping An is able to do this repeatedly. So we have probably 15, 20 businesses at different stages of incubation that can be the next Good Doctor or the next Lufax. And
so all of that kind of made you kind of look at what was happening and say, this is the time to shift from being at Citi to being...
I'd left Citi already, so I decided to take a break in my career and think about next steps, which is, it's a great luxury to be able to do that. Yeah. And I actually ended up working for Ping An a month after I first met Peter, but I thought, what a unique organization to work with a world-class entrepreneur like this, with this track record, this combination of capabilities that he's built and the company's built, and this vision forward to think of really the world in, as a data economy into the future, and think of, what does it take to be a leader in businesses where the ability to derive value from data has really replaced the traditional capabilities that have made businesses like ours successful, such as traditional physical distribution or physical assets or even capital itself.
So with all of this amazing platform laid and everything you did up until now being kind of practice for what you're now doing, how would you describe the next 12, 24, 36, or even longer months that you're kind of looking out into the horizon and where you want to go with this and where you want to help Peter go?
Yeah, so I think for the company, it's an exciting time. I mean, just thinking about the health space, what interests me about that is the way the company and Peter have looked at the entire addressable health market as the opportunity. Because we're the largest health insurer in China, but that's only 5% of the market. That's growing beautifully. Many business leaders would be quite satisfied with 35% compound growth every year in that business. Ping An has taken a completely different view, and they've said that this health system is going to transform, and we want to be part of it. We want to be a key player in that transformation. We want to be an enabler in that transformation. When you observe how technology has been transformative in China in the last decade, in areas like payments, in retailing and entertainment, in obviously many other areas, social network, chat and all that kind of thing. I think you've seen in China a transformation in normal people's lives. It's probably more fundamental than anywhere else. And that's one, adoption has been very rapid, but two, these technologies are sort of filling a void, whereas in the developed markets of the world, there were other ways of making payments, and there still are, that are largely adequate. In China, there really wasn't a way of making convenient payments other than cash, as an example. So I think people have a belief in technology in China. And I think that in the health space, that's sort of part of the underpinning for Ping An's vision, that platforms like Good Doctor, platforms like our state health insurance platform, platforms like our clinic platform. So we've got an enterprise platform that supports about half the private clinics in China as the government tries to encourage the development of a primary care system, which has largely been lacking so far. And we've got a health cloud that's trying to gather data wherever we can from our customers, from the marketplace, and then apply that in intelligent ways to add value to the businesses that we have. We just think that as this thing unfolds, there will be an important role for players like Ping An, and we can bring enormous value.
So when you you wear a couple hats, right, at Ping An, you have two roles. What are the?
So I'm the Chief Innovation Officer of the company, which is an unspecified role, and Peter's really the Chief Innovation Officer of this company. Let's be very clear. So what I'm trying to do is figure out areas where I can bring some value, largely from connecting Ping An with innovative platforms and companies elsewhere in the world. So the second role I have is to run what we call the Ping An Global Voyager Fund, which is our corporate venture capital arm. And the objective of that is to complement a lot of the internal R&D work that we do and business development we do, and to give Ping An access to technologies, platforms, and business models on a global basis that can be additive, that can be valuable to Ping An, where we can invest in the company, typically as a minority investor, to create alignment, and then create some form of partnership or cooperation. It could be as simple as us, hosting these guys on our cloud, and then giving them access to our business ecosystem, and possibly exposing their APIs externally or their service externally on some kind of revenue share basis. Or it could be something closer to a traditional legal joint venture, and everything in between that. And it could be near term or it could be long term. It could be option value, or it could be immediately realizable value. So we're open to all of the above, but it is for strategic access. It's global in scope, and it's focused at this stage in two principal areas. Firstly, fintech, given the breadth of financial businesses we have, and second, digital health.
And when you think about both of these areas, in particular digital health, of course, because I think it represents one of the main reasons we kind of both found each other, but also partnered together.
Totally.
How would you describe your vision for the digital health side of the Voyager Fund?
Well, I think it's to find products, models, technologies, platforms that can plug into our ecosystem. So we made an investment in a company called TytoCare in Israel at the beginning of this year, and they make a small kit that allows you to measure your vitals, or a patient to measure their vitals using a smartphone, cloud-enabled. And what it does is allows a doctor providing a consultation over telemedicine to be able to observe your heartbeat or listen to your lungs with some tools to help analyze that. Look at the back of your throat, look inside your ear, measure your temperature, the kind of stuff that a doctor would do in a clinic, and deliver that as part of a telemedicine proposition. And we think that potentially enriches the telemedicine proposition significantly. And as part of our deal with Tyto, we have an agreement that we will distribute their product in China, and we're going to work with them to value engineer that product for the China market.
And so that represents the kinds of companies that you're hoping to find.
So that's an example, precisely. It could be diagnostic services that we can stick on a platform that could be available to, let's say, our clinic platform. We call it Voyager Clinic. So we've looked at quite a lot of companies in the image diagnostic space, for example, and we're seeing some of those get to be commercializable and scalable as an example. It could be services that we can actually deliver as consumer services. I guess it's difficult to talk about specifics when some of these discussions are ongoing.
Yeah.
But we've got some.
What we can say in terms of just general speaking around the kinds of companies you're looking to find, and we're looking together to kind of go out and scout for that would meet what we kind of call the ideal startup profile of the types of entrepreneurs and companies you'd like to attract to the fund.
Yeah. So think of anything that can be digitally delivered to consumers as a diagnostic service, as an adherence service, a way to encourage behaviors that are going to drive health outcomes at the consumer level. Those are extremely interesting to us because we can easily overlay those on platforms like Good Doctor, or we can embed them in as ancillary services into our insurance offerings. And we can, provide them as added services through our agency force. We have 1.45 million agents in China, so we're always looking for ways to add value to what our agents can actually bring to their clients. So that's quite exciting for us.
And so, how early are you getting involved in the companies? What's the ideal stage that you love to start?
That's a really interesting question because we've thought about it a lot, and in general, I think corporates make a mistake of getting involved with companies at too early a stage, and particularly large corporates. Mm-hmm. And I think we've taken the view that we're a very big company. We have 325,000 staff. We have 33 business units at the first level, many more as you go through the organization. So companies that we engage with need to be at a certain stage of development. Typically in the first 3 to 4 years, as we all know, a new business is going to go through a few pivots.
Sure. We call them iterations.
Iterations, it's a good way to do it. There are inevitably issues around whether people can work together, can't. It's a bootstrapping process. Yeah. I mean, you're creating something out of nothing, from zero to something, right? And generally what we want to do is to deal with companies once they've already done that. They now have a product, a platform, they have some customers, they've got a revenue trajectory that we can value. And typically we're looking for companies where we can put a minimum of about $10 to $20 million to work. We're a $1 billion fund. So if we go much smaller than that, we're just going to be at this for a very long time and it just won't have impact for us. So it's really a combination of financial scale, but also being at that point where the company is past its sort of initial 3-4 year early development process, and they have the bandwidth and the wherewithal to be able to engage with a new market and a very large company.
So when you think back, in fact, we were just talking earlier about it's a year ago since you started, a little less than a year ago since we first met and really started outlining our partnership. But what made you choose Startup Health as a partner, and kind of articulate for the listeners, just from your perspective, what success looks like?
Totally. So while we don't particularly want to invest directly in early stage companies, we still see huge value in being plugged into the early stage world. And we've decided that one way in which we can do that is through partner funds. And we particularly like partner funds who have a broader set of capabilities than just running a fund. And I think Startup Health was a perfect example of that. And the fact that you're able to filter a vast number of ideas, entrepreneurs, and proposals for businesses, you're able to select those that you think really have legs and a likelihood of success, and then you're able to invest yourselves through providing infrastructure, providing support, through providing a network of mentors and advisors, a role that you personally take yourself amongst others, and all of the other things that Startup Health does. So we were really impressed with that. We liked the thematic coherence that you have, the 10 moonshots, and the overriding or overarching vision of the firm, really to find ways of transforming health. We very much agree with the broad philosophy that underpins what you do. And so we were looking for someone that had very similar views about the future of health, the role of technology in transforming health, and was able to complement our focus on mid to larger stage companies, mid to later stage companies, with an early stage focus, but with a lot of discipline and high quality. So what we're looking for is ultimately deal flow. So the companies that graduate from Startup Health that get to meet the criteria that I articulated. So we've had a few of those already come to our attention, and that we're working with. So that's really interesting and most appreciated. But we're also interested in the flow of ideas. Even if we're not going to invest, it is still incredibly valuable for us to just know what's out there, what people are thinking, and what ideas look like they're going to be able to materialize as real businesses and transformers in the next 3 to 5 years.
One of the things that we really spent a lot of time connecting on is this uniqueness around the power of the entrepreneurs and their mindset to achieve those moonshots, and really having not just a long-term commitment, but a view of something incredibly meaningful to work on. From your perspective, as you look out, not short-term, but long-term, 5, 10, even 15 years out, what would you say would be the waving a magic wand incredible outcome that could come from these early both discussions, bets, and investments?
Sure. Well, look, I think we share this view, Steve, that much of the opportunity is actually quite low-hanging fruit in health. And we were discussing this earlier as well, but a lot of the transformational opportunities in health can be achieved perfectly well with technology that we already have. So I think a big part of the future can be and should be figuring out how to get ahead of conditions like chronic obesity, or helping patients that have diabetes to be able to either control that or indeed reverse the symptoms through relatively simple technology and through lifestyle changes. And there are many examples of this. So I think a desired long-term outcome from the kind of stuff that we're both working on would be to achieve real transformation in the cost of delivery and the incidence of these chronic diseases that are largely a function of behavior and choice, and find ways of really moving the needle. I think that would be one thing. I think a second thing is there are transformative technologies. Genomics is one that's just fascinating, and I was sharing it at lunch when we were talking a company that we've come into contact with recently. I guess it's well known in some circles, called Oxford Nanopore. And what they've done is they've created literally a device this big that can sequence a genome in minutes. That's astounding.
And very small.
The analogy I use is it's like the Sony Walkman of genomics. It's just a classic instance
Some people
of
listening won't even know what a
miniaturization.
Sony Walkman is, right?
Well, exactly. Well, think of the iPod Nano of genomics, maybe for the millennial generation. Exactly. For our generation, the Sony Walkman still means something.
So the little orange earphones.
Exactly.
So when you think about going back to the Peter Ma example of, I think he's one of the original health transformers, right? These entrepreneurs who embark on something, don't even realize necessarily where it's going, but they start with a meaningful impact and it expands. Yeah. You spent a lot more time with entrepreneurs in the last year than you probably spent in a lot of years in your former role.
Absolutely.
Especially in the early stage. What is it about entrepreneurs that really gets you excited?
Well, I'm always interested in people who can think about new possibilities and who can envisage a completely different way of getting something done or solving a problem. There's a certain fearlessness that you have to have, even a certain naivete.
We call it blissfully ignorant.
Indeed, and you have to sometimes almost like a tunnel vision. And there's a certain personality of entrepreneurs, I'm sure we both know, where that's very evident. There's this extreme focus, and I think that piece is quite interesting as a set of characteristics. But there are some people who are gifted in being able to think of ways of reconfiguring how we do stuff to solve big problems and to achieve outcomes that people don't even imagine. So I think that's one part of it. There's a whole bunch of other stuff as well to actually take that idea and then turn it into a reality.
Make it happen, yeah.
And I think the best entrepreneurs have a combination of these characteristics.
When you think about your personal side, because we spent a lot of time talking about Ping On and Ping On Global Voyager Fund, who is Jonathan Larsen? The non showing up to work Jonathan Larsen.
The non showing up to work Jonathan Larsen. Well, I'm 52. I'm married. I have one son who's now at university. So my wife Binny and I are empty nesters for the first time, which is kind of interesting.
Enjoying it?
Enjoying it, absolutely. And our son comes home fairly regularly, so that's good as well. What do I enjoy doing? I love sailing. So Hong Kong is where I live, so Hong Kong is a great place for sailing. I am a musician for many, many years. I play the clarinet and the piano.
Your whole life?
My whole life, or most since the age of 10, yeah, in the case of the clarinet, yeah. And I enjoy reading. We love food and wine, that kind of stuff.
What's the last book you read that was most meaningful to you?
What is the last book that I read that was most meaningful? I'm reading a book right now about, it's actually got nothing to do with fintech, digital health, business, or anything else. I'm reading a book about the Crimean War and the origins of the Crimean War and the role of Russia in the Middle East against the Ottoman Empire at the time in the 1850s. And what's very interesting is the resonances that you can see to this day and how some of the players in that part of the world still operate.
Is that those are the kinds of books you like reading?
I'm interested in history, yes.
Very, very cool. So last couple questions. When you look out at the role you can play in really inspiring the next generation of, whether it's be the people joining you at Ping On or the companies you work with, what is the single statement you would use to say the impact that Jonathan Larsen made on someone's life? Like, what role do you like to play in helping others?
Well, having run a bunch of businesses at Citi over the years, one thing that I always was excited to be able to do was to empower people and to create possibilities for them that they themselves hadn't even imagined. And when you see somebody be able to succeed on dimensions that surprise them, and achieve things that they'd never thought about before, that's an unbelievably satisfying thing for me. And so that's something I think is great. As far as what I'm doing now at Ping An, what excited me to do this thing was to be the point of interface between this fascinating Chinese company with this extraordinary franchise in China and all of the scale, technology, and vision that we've talked about in this conversation, to be really the interface between that and this whole world of innovation in health and finance on a global basis. I thought, what a unique thing to be able to do. So what I'd like to be able to do with that is help Ping An to take advantage of it, to take advantage of the world of innovation that's happening around in the States, in Europe, in Israel, in Asia, etc. But what I'd also like to do is to take great platforms that have been developed outside of China, globally, and bring them into China and allow these new companies with breakthrough ideas, with breakthrough technologies and breakthrough platforms to be able to access the China market with a unique partner such as Ping An.
Love it. Fantastic. We're going to end on that note. We could spend a lot more time talking, but the last 6 months since we formalized our partnership, we announced our partnership about 4 months ago.
Yep.
It's been an extraordinary joy to work with you and Marco and your entire team, and we feel like we're just getting started. There's so much left to do, and really the alignment of vision for really improving the health and well-being of everyone in the world, bringing our organization's unique ability to the table is incredibly exciting. We're honored to be partners with you.
We totally agree, and we're delighted to be working with Startup Health.
Fantastic.
Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.